the heck with it. You get 2 Halloween videos this year. This one's pretty spooky sounding too, why not? Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old, and today I'm talking about the new album from Amon Tobin, Long Stories. So, this was fast. Fear and a Handful of Dust was Amon Tobin's big comeback album and first new studio album in 8 years, and only a few months later he already has another new studio album, basically as a companion to that one. Bandcamp description says the 2 albums were made in parallel, perhaps in the same sessions. And on top of that, he announced earlier that he is going to be releasing 4 more albums in the coming months, in a series of 7 that also includes Fear and a Handful of Dust, as well as this indie rock side project he did under the name Only Child Tyrant. I skipped over that one. That's a lot of freaking Amon Tobin. But alright, may as well discuss this new one and get right into it. This album, like Fear and a Handful of Dust, is good. Very good, even. Maybe about equally good. So not quite great, but you know, still. I like this album for very different reasons, though. Like, Fear and a Handful of Dust hasn't grown on me a lot since I reviewed it, but I definitely have a lot more respect for that album than I do this one. That one felt a lot more meticulous and detail-oriented. Long Stories has a lot of similar sounds, but aims more to capture a kind of vibe and atmosphere. He says it's more about balance, melody, and harmony. But the surprise for this album that helps make up for the fact that it feels less detail-oriented to me is the fact that it feels like this album called back more to the sounds of Amon Tobin's earlier work. Still probably sounds like Fear and a Handful more than any of his other previous albums. But while that album was a total left hook that I wouldn't have been able to identify as Amon Tobin if you hadn't told me, this seems more characteristic of him. Adheres more to the kinds of sounds I tend to associate with his work. There's some jazzier tinges around the edges, some much heavier soundtrack vibes. There's a part of me who almost kind of wishes he released this project first, since it wouldn't have been nearly as big a whiplash, but I don't know. I think this album is also growing on me faster than Fear and a Handful as well. I don't think Fear and a Handful is more consistent. There were a couple of weak points on this one that didn't add much for me, but the high points on this one are also much higher. I will say right off the bat, this album's lead single and opener, One Shy Morning, got me much more excited than On a Hilltop Sat the Moon. This track is freaking great. Right from its opening electric piano chords, it sets that spooky but psychedelic mood. And guess what? It has drums. Well, they're still very minimal and abstract, but it's mostly just a big booming kick drum, a reverb click, and a tambourine, but it still sounded absolutely amazing, had a fantastically harrowing and enveloping atmosphere, and an impressive bigness to it that nothing on Handful really had. This track was finally scratching that Amon Tobin itch for me. I absolutely loved it right on first listen. Perhaps, unfortunately, that is still the best track on the album, and that track being as good as it is probably made the rest of the album feel a little bit underwhelming on first listen, but there is plenty of great stuff all over this thing that grew on me pretty quickly. Full Panther was pretty solid, took impressive command of its mood, alongside this one bass line in the second half, which gave me some Air vibes. That was a good one. And Sounds Like Moths, while definitely sounding like a leftover from Fear and a Handful, still would have been one of the best tracks had it been included on that track listing. It's kind of like On a Hilltop Sat the Moon, but further intensified. Oh, and Clear for Blue, that one was fantastic. Read like a better Fooling Alright, at least uses these humming vocal lines in a pretty similar way, though also with a richer sonic palette, and those plinky electric pianos give it a little bit of jazzy soundtrack-y flair that really helped it resonate more for me emotionally. Great track, and while most of these tracks do not have any percussion, there were a couple of other tracks that had drums too. Both of those were highlights. Red Moon's spooky and heavily disorienting blend of sounds made it a big highlight, and it does have some pretty flashy and dense moments as well that I really liked, and a pretty experimental and strange gurgling atonal outro that's a nice touch. Another track that prominently features percussion on it is Dust for a Duster, which is probably my second favorite track on the album behind the opener. Has a slow, plodding Pink Floyd-esque beat, but with all these great, intense washes of synths that just envelop me in the best way. and with all its jazzy noir vibes, helped by some cool guitar sounds and the electric pianos again, and even some 60s-esque organ licks. Another absolutely excellent track that scratched that Amon Tobin itch while not sounding like it was rehashing previous material. There were some tracks I wasn't as huge on though, and mainly the title track. That one is the most minimal track in the bunch, and again it captures a cool, dissonant, spooky atmosphere, but it is so simplistic, it doesn't feel as impressive as other moments on here, and in general feels like another Fear and a Handful of Dust rehash / leftover. I do think this album also kinda loses my interest a bit in the last stretch too. Brushed Aluminum Reeds has some cool progressions, but could get a bit repetitive, didn't stick out much in the overall track listing, and Atkinson's Sky, that was pretty nice with all its cinematic pads and guitar plucking. Another cool track that provides that sense of menace, but often fell in the background. But I do like the closer, Feed. A lot of heavy, harsh, buzzing, intense distortion noises on that one, alongside more plinking electric pianos. Do like the inclusion of those on all the tracks they appear on. I think there's even a flute riff at one point on this one, though it's kind of hard to tell through all the distortion. Yeah, not sure if it's the most cathartic possible closer you could have picked, but it's certainly a serviceable and interesting pick, and probably a more satisfying closer than Darkest Dogs from Handful. I know I've been using the comparisons to Fear and a Handful of Dust as negative throughout much of this review, but I do still think that album is really good and has a hand up over this album in many ways. That one did still feel a lot more original than this did. Long Stories is probably one of Tobin's least original or forward-thinking albums so far, but I don't necessarily count that as a negative. Getting those tiny whiffs of permutation and out from out where vibes on this thing was absolutely a plus for me. And for what it's worth, as similar to Fear and a Handful as this album may sound, and feeling like as much of a companion album as Tobin said it was, it does definitely do its own things all the same and set itself apart. If the best stuff from these last two albums were combined into one project, it could really be something special, but we get what we got. Two albums that mirror each other quite well and have slightly different strengths and weaknesses that about even each other out. Handful is the more experimental record, more consistent, more conceptual, more fully realized as an album, while Long Stories has a better command over its mood and atmosphere. It feels more musical, it's more enveloping, and the best moments here were way better. Both of the albums are absolutely worth checking out, and hey, they make for cool Halloween listening on top of that. Probably isn't a more fitting Halloween video than Biosphere's Departed Glories, but this album is undoubtedly getting a higher recommendation. So yeah, overall, like Fear and a Handful of Dust, I'm overall feeling a 7.5 on this. But of course, it's just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. Shout out to my Patreon supporters. They're awesome people. You want to add yourself to that list or make me review something, link to my Patreon is in the description. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.